This is the Build Wealth Canada podcast, episode number 36.
Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada show. Today, we have one of my favorite personal finance bloggers, Kyle Prevost, on the show, who runs the site Young and Thrifty together with Justin Bouchard. Now, it's also great to have Kyle on the show because he has recently put together one of Canada's largest personal finance conferences, and it's actually totally free. The conference is actually all online. There's over 25 expert speakers from across Canada, and you can actually join the kickoff today at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So to get your free tickets, just go to buildwealthcanada.ca/summit. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/summit. That's SUMMIT, and you can get your free tickets there. And if you can't make it, or if you're listening to this episode in the future after the conference has already taken place, then you can actually still go to buildwealthcanada.ca/summit to get an all-access pass where you will have unlimited access to all the talks whenever you want, so you can watch them whenever you actually do have the free time. All right, so I hope you check it out. I'll be attending for sure. I'm actually one of the speakers at the conference too, so I hope to see you there. And once again, the link to the free tickets is buildwealthcanada.ca/summit. All right, now let's get into the interview. We're going to talk with Kyle about some of the top financial mistakes and misconceptions that Canadians have and how to avoid them. All right, Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Cornell.
It's nice to have you back. And so we were chatting a fair bit before the interview as well. And one of the things you mentioned that was that in many cases, young people in Canada, particularly in some of the major cities, should actually not be buying a home. Can you elaborate a bit on this?
Yeah, I think inevitably housing has gotten or will get, depending on your definition, to a certain point where it no longer makes sense to buy a house. And I think it has rapidly approached that sort of sweet spot where it just isn't rational anymore to buy a home. I mean, you can maybe make an argument for certain condos or what have you, but I think that we're getting blinded by what I call the religion of Canadian housing, where it's like this middle class belief, and maybe religion isn't even a strong enough word at this point, because if you look at the statistics in Canada, middle class Canadians are fitting less and less the traditional model of religion. But it seems one of the things we can all agree on is that you're not a real adult until you buy a house, and then if you don't own a house, what do you talk about at dinner parties? There's nothing left to talk about as a middle-class Canadian if you can't talk about home prices and how crazy everything is. And I think that sort of sets a dangerous precedent where people are ignoring rent-to-price ratios. They're ignoring, if they're a young person, keeping their career flexible so that they can move to pursue whether it's a higher wage or a more ambitious promotion or what have you. They're ignoring that. And they're basically betting on speculation. They're saying, I think my house value will continue to go up. I need to get on the housing ladder as soon as possible, no matter what the sacrifice is. If I have to borrow from a down payment from my parents, that's fine. If I have to mortgage myself to the hilt, that's fine. I just need to get on the housing ladder as soon as I can so that I can take advantage of these skyrocketing housing prices. And I think that is a very dangerous sort of funnel to get into. Cycle to get into, and I think we're already starting. We're recording this here near the end of August, and I think we're already starting to see it in some of the bigger cities. And I honestly don't know anymore what the supply and demand point of housing prices should be. I just know that even though rents are high in Canadian major urban centers, it still makes more sense most of the time right now for young people to rent.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's really easy to just kind of go with, well, everyone I trust says to buy a house, and that's what I've been told my whole life. So that's the default thing to do without actually doing any math or any research, right? So I'm with you on that one. It's like you really got to look at kind of what the actual price is, what is the rent, how much are you saving? Like there's all these things to consider as opposed to just kind of going with the default, because that could be a pretty... I mean, imagine being a young person and you're stuck in like a $400,000 mortgage or something. You know what I mean? And I don't know.
Yeah, after scraping and saving a down payment for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, no, exactly. Do you see that a lot kind of all across Canada, or primarily major cities is kind of the big one where you think it's really got it on hand?
I think the religion of Canadian housing knows no cultural boundaries. It's like one thing that can bring all Canadians together.
That and
In
the
their,
Maple Leafs, right?
in their complete yeah, exactly, in their complete ignorance of, I think it's even more widely accepted than Tim Hortons at this point. And I think that, so it's shared right across the country. The thing is, you're just going to get into a little bit less trouble buying a $350,000 home in Regina or Halifax or Winnipeg than you are, or even say a $500,000 home in Calgary or Edmonton than you will buying a $1.2 million home in Toronto or Vancouver. Even we see the GTA. It's not even really just Toronto anymore. It's anywhere within a 70-mile radius of Toronto. Uh, and so I think that's where the speculation has been most pronounced. And regardless of, I just hear the craziest stuff when people talk about this bubble, because the fact is we're just starting to get real data on this. So when people tell you they know for a fact that because they saw two people of Asian descent walking on their street the other day, that the quote unquote Chinese people are coming in and buying all the houses. That's not actually a data. That's just a couple of anecdotes. And by the way, those people could be third generation Canadians, or they could be students that have purchased a house, and that will, no matter what tax the government puts in, they'll still be able to purchase that house. So I think there's all sorts of weird, flawed government policy that's coming in. Maybe it's not flawed, but I should say it's sort of fly by the seat of your pants policy that's being brought in. And there's just sort of a weird hysteria around the idea of speculation. So whether it's Canadians that are speculating, whether it's first-generation immigrants that are moving markets and speculating, or whether it's sort of just the investor class that are buying these houses purely to resell them the next year and hoping for massive gains. I think this weird speculation game that we're playing, young people should probably just steer clear of that in a lot of cases.
It is a bit scary how it sounds a bit like some of the conversations I'm sure people had, around the crash in the US, right? Where it's like, oh, well, because the property always goes up significantly year to year. Like, obviously, that's going to keep happening indefinitely. That's obviously not the case, right? So I'm not saying we're going to be in store for something like that per se, but, when the housing prices are, some of them, going up like, double digits a year, that's not a normal thing. So I'm really hoping that people aren't expecting that to continue indefinitely, because that's just, and buying houses based on that assumption.
Exactly, and it can't, right? And I know as soon as you say USA or as soon as you say bubble, right away people in this country just go insane and lose all sense. They're like, it's totally different than the USA. There's CMHC, and Canadians are better at paying mortgages than Americans, and you can't just walk away from your mortgage. And all of that is true, and perhaps the drop in Canada won't be like a 60% overnight drop or something like that, in some of the regions of the US that we saw. But so I try to just stay away from this debate of like, will things be as bad as the US? Because truth be told, I really don't know. I think there's some logical points to be made there that we lend a little bit differently in Canada, and we have a little bit different buying power than the States does. But and just our legal systems are different. So there are some like logical arguments there that it won't be quite as bad. But I still think that shouldn't really affect the discussion of, is buying a home in Canada today, if you're a young person, a good financial decision? And sort of what factors should you be taking into that? Like we're going to talk a little bit about the Canadian Financial Summit that I'm a part of here coming up. And I do an extended conversation with a young lady by the name of Helena Liu. And we're going to be discussing sort of in depth. I'll take you on a deep dive and throw a bunch of stats at you if you want to hear where I'm coming from with all this. Some quotes by people way smarter than me. If my little anecdotal talk here didn't convince you.
Yeah, no, that sounds good, Kyle. Yeah, let's move on to the next question, because I think we've yeah, like we're not trying to say that what happened in Canada or what happened in the US is going to happen in Canada, but I think we're just saying don't just go and buy the houses by default, and don't expect that just because we've seen some pretty big gains recently that's going to happen indefinitely, because that's a recipe of disaster, and that's the kind of mindset that a lot of the flippers I'm sure had in the US. When things happen, right? Obviously, there's a lot to that, but just just think and do some math. Unfortunately, that's kind of the thing too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Kyle, you're a high school teacher, and so you actually get to teach personal finance, which is pretty cool. I wish we had that when I was in school. But I'm sure you deal with a lot of misconceptions about money from kids and their parents, and I'm sure you've got a lot of like you tell something to the kids tell their parents, the parent gets mad because they think you're wrong, and then they tell their kid, and then it's like this whole this whole cycle. So what are so I don't know, hopefully you don't have too many gray hairs yet, but what are some of the most detrimental misconceptions about either investing or personal finance in general that you've heard just kind of from these many interactions that you've had over the years?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been asked a couple times now, like, hey, are you going to have a class for non-high school students anytime soon in the area? And I certainly have considered it, but I've said no for two reasons. One is because I have to see the financial advisors in the area in the grocery store, and they will not be happy with me when I tell them that their whole business model is flawed, essentially. That they should be changing up and become fee-only advisors instead of charging ridiculous mutual fund rates. So that's reason one. And two is because high school kids, believe it or not, are much easier to teach personal finance to than adults, because they come to it with very few preconceived notions. And they just believe me, actually, which could be dangerous, I suppose. But I try and back it up with a lot of folks smarter than me. We read a lot of stuff from like the Andrew Hallam book and the Millionaire Teacher, and a lot of Preet Banerjee stuff that's out there. And I'm forgetting a lot of the folks I use, obviously, but I use a lot. One of the real misconceptions I find when I start on the first day, and we look at if you invest the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes or a half pack of cigarettes, what compounded investment returns can do for you. Because obviously, like, you start talking about $1 million or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you're going to lose high school kids. Their eyes will just glaze over. But
it's just theory at that point, right? When it's that high of a number, it's like some theoretical thing. It's like talking about the GDP. Like, okay, well, how does this relate to me?
Yeah. It might as well be GDP for what they're. But they know people that smoke a pack a day or a half pack a day. So that is like a tangible thing. They know that people can do that you can work a regular job and that you can smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. Mm-hmm. And we show, like, here's what happens if you invest, within an RSP. And in tandem with that lesson, I'm like, don't ever utter the phrase, it's time to buy RSPs. It's the buy RSP season.
Yeah.
I've purchased RSPs this year. Anything like that, I'm like, do not say that. That's a pet peeve of mine. Like, I will do my best to fail you in this course if I hear you utter those words. And so, of course, they're like, well, so then at some point in the course, their teenage instincts kick in, and they'll have heard at home their parents will say, oh, yeah, I bought RRSPs this year. Right. And then, of course, they take great perverse joy in correcting their parents and being like, Mr. Prevost said that there's no such thing as buying RRSPs, that RRSPs are free to open, and you can open them at any place, as many places as you want, and they're not an actual investment. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, their parents get super defensive and say, well, I'm going to have a talk with that, Mr. Prevost, because I'll tell you right now that I buy RRSPs, and that RRSPs are a thing, and I purchase them from my financial advisor. And then, of course, then they come down here and and we have a little chat. And then oftentimes by the end of the chat, I'm not sure if we're seeing totally eye to eye, but sometimes they leave saying, I think I got to get a new financial advisor. And sometimes they just, there's this like real fear that when it comes to money that people's, I call it the emperor has no clothes syndrome. If you've ever heard sort of the parable of the emperor has no clothes, nobody except the little kid wants to tell the emperor that he's not actually wearing any clothes. Mm-hmm. And I find that's how it is with personal finances. No one wants to admit that they don't really know what they're talking about.
Right.
And so when you say, no, you actually buy investments and put them within an RSP, or you shelter them in an RSP, I actually just use a basic metaphor like a box or a bucket to describe RSPs and TFSAs and RESPs to my students. And so they catch on right away. Then they're like, oh, yeah, I knew that. And I'm like, okay, well, then what I'm interested to know, what do you have in your RSP? And they're like, well, like investments. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so it's one of these common misconceptions in Canada. We talk about RSP season, which I love the fact that it's like, well, only once a year can you buy an RSP. And the fact that most Canadians believe that's a thing. Really? It just blows my mind. that folks don't understand that you can automate RSP contributions. You can self-automate by just, on the 5th of every month or whatever, purchasing your ETF or purchasing your sending it to your robo-advisor, whatever you're going to do. So that's my number one pet peeve. My number two pet peeve is, and this ties into what we just talked about, my home is the best investment I ever made. And if I had a nickel for every time I'd heard that, I wouldn't need to be worried about compound investment returns, because I think I'd be rich at this point with all the middle-class Canadians I've heard say, my home's the best investment I ever made. And I don't like that for a couple of reasons. One, most of the time, these people plan on living in their homes as long as possible, and most of the time until they pass away. I live in a rural community, so that's sort of a reality for a lot of folks. So it's like, well, then if you never plan on selling your home, it's not an investment, is it? It's simply a
Right.
really nice luxury and a place to live, which is great, good on you, but it's not actually an investment unless you plan on selling it and living off the proceeds. Now, I've had to eat my words a couple times because I have been actually wrong. Sometimes when folks say this, they unconsciously are correct because they have invested in very poor mutual funds when they've purchased their RSPs, as they say. They've bought very bad mutual funds if they've invested at all, and they actually don't have any other investments. They maybe have some money in a high interest savings account, or perhaps they've purchased a GIC or something like that. But in some cases, their home actually by default is the best investment they've ever made because they have no other investments or assets. When a big pickup truck is the only other investment that you've ever made. Then I say investment with air quotes here.
Yeah, I was gonna say like a truck investment. If they're using it for work, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not even an asset level. Yeah, exactly. And so
I'm like, maybe you're a contractor and you're using that to, I don't know, carry your crew and supplies around.
So those are sort of the two things. There's obviously a lot more, but it is interesting when you combine just the real financial illiteracy of most Canadians with the teenage instinct to try and correct your parents at all points just to show how much smarter you are than them. Like oftentimes whatever Mr. Prevost said in class gets lost in translation along the way, and it's led to a few interesting encounters. But
I believe it. Yeah, and you mentioned the RSP thing. I find with TFSAs it's especially prevalent because like just the way that the marketing has been built around them is that they're savings accounts, just like you have a regular savings account, but this one's even better because you'll get a higher percentage, and it's tax free, right? So it sounds like a no-brainer, and so people kind of associate with like a regular savings account that you have at the bank, which is really smart from a marketing like if you're a marketing manager at a bank, they've convinced people that that's what it is. I'm sure they probably got a raise or something because that's because then obviously they're paying you their 2%, and then I don't know, they're probably investing it, right, and earning significantly more. I find that with the TFSAs a lot where people are like, oh yeah, I have my TFSA savings account. You can actually invest things there, right?
I often will talk to groups of business teachers. Cornell, these are people that teach business. Some of them actually teach personal finance. There's a few, but like they're familiar with things like interest and dividends and stuff. They actually have no idea that you can invest in a huge variety of assets within a TFSA.
Really?
They have no idea. In fact, they look at me very skeptically when I tell them that.
That's actually very scary. I had no idea it was like that. Wow.
That is true. I always laugh at these sort of self forms that they get, Canadians, where they ask them like, "Are you confident that you know about money?" or some variation on that theme. Like, "Are you confident that you know the difference between TFSA and RSP?" And like 60% of Canadians are like, "Yes," and which is to some people they're like, "Oh my God, 40% don't know," and I'm like, "Oh, that number is way larger. Those are definitely emperor has no clothes people." I would say it's definitely closer to 10% than 60%. And it's just people that don't want to admit that they have this huge blind spot. It's like when you ask people if they're an above average driver, and like probably 98% of Canadians will say that they're an above average driver.
That's right.
Clearly there should be a few more people with their hands up there.
Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting, yeah, when you talk about your the parents coming, right, to have a discussion with you. It'd be interesting to use that cigarettes example, right, with the compound interest, or like just with the compounding, and just say, okay, now let's apply that same sort of calculation to what fees you're paying on your mutual funds right now.
Yeah.
And then you go to drive home and your car has is a little scratched or damaged from the angry parents. Or the angry financial advisors that you that know where you work.
I won't slander anyone on your podcast here, Cornell, but there's one particular very successful financial institution that makes a lot of money off mutual fees, and they've bought the naming rights to we'll just call it the Winnipeg football team. And and I always say, like, hey, to put your name on a building, where do you think that money comes from? Like, this group has so much money that they can afford to buy marketing, and they own a brick and mortar business on every corner of every city in Canada, and they've got their name on every major sporting venue and stuff. Where do you think that money comes from? Like, does it, like, are they just that good at investing their own money? Like, no, that's your money that's building that stadium or whatever. Anyway.
We can
we could go on that.
We could go on for a while. Yeah, this is fun. So to switch things up a bit, so you've done a lot of research on robo-advisors in Canada, and actually the article you wrote on it, like a full-blown guide, it's the most best and kind of in-depth one I've ever seen. So that's just awesome, and it's really easy to find because it always ranks high on Google as well. So I mean, kudos to that. So, but what is your take on robo-advisors versus other low-cost options? Like, so for example, Tangerine comes to mind, TDE series comes to mind. So what's your view on robos versus those guys, and then comparing those guys to the really kind of ultra low-cost options, which, and in there I would put basically, if you just buy ETFs yourself, that's, I mean, to me, that's pretty much the most ultra low-cost option you can go. What are your thoughts about kind of these three different options?
Yeah, so I have like sort of a macro thought and a micro thought. So the macro thought that, like, the big picture for most Canadians is whatever of those versions, whether you're talking about TDE series, Tangerine, turnkey portfolios, the robo-advisors, the do-it-yourself, whatever's going to motivate you to do it, pick that one. Because at the end of the day, the vast majority of the benefit you're going to get from any of those options. Now, probably if you're listening to a podcast called Build Wealth Canada, you're ready for a little more nuance than that. But if your friend comes to you and says, what should I do out of these? Just tell him yes. And he'll say, what do you mean? Yes, just pick one. Just pick one. And in fact, you can read about the RSP TFSA thing later. For right now, just open an account and start, because that's honestly where most Canadians are at. Now, obviously, your podcast is not most Canadians. So to drill down a little bit, we've got a nice little calculator at autoinvest.ca. And if you're just a pure fees person, you can go to autoinvest.ca and you can see how you can input maybe not all of your variables, but we've done a pretty good job. I got to give a shout out here to the Because Money crew. You know, John and Sandy have done a fantastic job building the calculator, and we're running it now. And it'll give you just a pure fee breakdown of what will be cheapest for your specific circumstances. But obviously there's more than fees to take into consideration. So I'll give you just a brief context here. I've been a huge fan of do-it-yourself investing. I know you and I think I was on the podcast here a couple of years ago talking about ETFs and sort of the bare bones way of doing things. And that's what I use to this day. However, I got really tired of preaching, do it yourself, do it yourself, do it yourself. And folks would read the free ebook that we give out that shows exactly how I invest my money. And I would inevitably get these emails. Okay, Kyle, well, I went to do this, and I started opening up my discount brokerage, and then I started reading something on stock picking or whatever, and I still haven't really got around to it. Or I started doing this, and then I couldn't decide what account to open or what brokerage to go with, so I didn't do anything. Or I started it, and then I waited till the end of the month to make my contributions, and there was never any money left at the end of the month to make my contributions with. Or I started to read, and basically there was just, I think for both of us, Cornell, we're like perhaps too logical to an extreme, where people would find us a little bit weird in how logical we are with how we make decisions.
I know I'm weird. I've accepted that fact years ago. Yeah, I just embrace it now.
Same with me, right? And so when I try to put myself in the brain of sort of the average person that just doesn't care about investing all that much, that just wants a solution that will help them out. people they weren't overcoming the obstacle of do-it-yourself investing, just the basic logistics of it. And obviously, it's still by far it's significantly cheaper than robo advisors are, or even the TD series or Tangerine. But there was just a few critical logistical obstacles, whether it was the math involved, whether it was just understanding the concept of passive versus active investing. The number of people I had that were like, all right, I got my ETFs, but is now a good time to buy into the market?
Right.
The number of emails I get that are like that, and I just shake my head and be like, so you skimmed my book and ignored what you didn't want to read, and now you want me to give you stock tips on when I can predict the market, like as if I would be like giving away free, like if I could actually predict the market, I wouldn't be giving it away free through Gmail, I can assure you.
Exactly.
And so what I did is I started recommending these robo advisors, which I felt a little bit guilty about at first, truth be told, because I don't personally use them.
But you're very transparent about it, and I liked how you did that, because like in your guide, you talk so much about them and everything, right? And the pros and cons, and
Yeah.
when I first started reading it, I was like, holy crap, did Kyle like switch over to robos? I thought he was like a do-it-yourself investor guy. Like, why would he? And I started reading more of it just to figure out why you switched, because I'm like, really? Like, why would he switch? That makes no sense. And then I saw at the bottom, you're like, disclaimer, I still do it myself. It's still the least expensive way to do it. So I was like, okay, good. This is just like to actually help other people who maybe aren't like into this stuff as much as you and I are. So I don't know. I thought that was really cool. Sorry to cut you off, but I had to.
No, that's exactly like my buddy Justin that I run Young and Thrifty with. He actually uses Wealth Simple. I've got several friends that use Modern Advisor, Nest Wealth, and like I actually have. I used to try and like get my buddies onto my geeky level and be like, do it yourself. And now I'm just like robo advisor. That's what I just recommend. And I recommend they read the article. And what I usually tell people is, look, okay, it really boils down to a few things. One is, how much are the fees going to be worth to you? So figure that out using our auto invest calculator if you want. And then figure out if the convenience factor of the robo-advisor, where you can literally just automate your contributions every month and it's totally taken care of for you, and there's someone there to ask questions to, whether that's through the phone, whether it's through email, online chat. Decide how much those things are worth to you, and also decide if you want to because do-it-yourself investing, the way I describe it to people is it is applying grade 9, 10 math. Right. It is the math is not rocket science. But be honest with yourself about whether you want to revisit grade 9, 10 math concepts every month. And that's not everyone that wants to do that. And there's no crime in that. Like, I tell people, like, truth be told, I don't find it all that impossible to do. I find it pretty straightforward. But if you throw me into a grade 9, 10 French class, my brain is spinning. Right. So don't be too proud to be like, you know what, grade 9, 10 math wasn't my thing, because what you're going to do is that pride is going to keep you from investing at all, and you're just going to sit into paralysis by analysis, and you're never actually going to get around to investing. So take a look at the convenience factor, and sort of decide whether it's worth it for you. And again, we've got a little more nuance if you go to that robo-advisor guide on Young and Thrifty. But basically, they all subscribe to various versions of passive index investing, and that's the main thing, that asset allocation, passive investing. You're already sort of 80, 90% of the way home, no matter which of those options you choose. It just becomes that cherry on top. I want the cherry on top, but some folks are like, no, I'm cool just getting the sundae with very minimal effort.
Is that the quote from The Big Short?
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah, the sprinkles of the cherry. I'm not as cool as
it's like, I get the cherry, but you get the sundae. You get the sundae.
Yeah, who's Ryan there? Anyway, I'm not as
Ryan Gosling or whatever.
Blockbuster. Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That was a good movie. Okay, no, awesome though. Thanks for showing that. I always crack up whenever I start talking to you. Another thing too is like, so a lot of Canadians, right, are really interested in dividend-paying companies, especially now. A lot of Canadians are getting older. They're more, they're getting more and more interested in the kind of the income side of things as opposed to just growth. So, what are your thoughts about doing kind of the index investing versus just dividend investing, versus maybe doing a little bit of both, right? So having some in kind of broad market indexes and some stocks maybe in like a non-registered account, you get the dividend tax credit, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and again, so this is like the macro versus micro conversation for me. The macro for most Canadians is yes, do it. And they're like, do what? Just do it. Like if you're going to stick to dividend investing principles, you're going to have a lot more in common than not with index investors. So if dividends really are what motivates you to get investing and to save money, go for it. I got nothing against dividend investing. I prefer the simplicity of index investing for most Canadians in most circumstances. And the funny fact is that when you look at the Canadian market, if you look at who the top dividend sort of producers are, and you look at a Canadian index, it's all the same companies, right? It just depends on sort of how weighted you're going to be in RBC versus Potash Corp, but you're going to have both RBC and Potash Corp in your portfolio to some degree. So with the biggest companies in Canada also being solid dividend producers, you're going to have a lot of crossover there. I think for me, the one instance is basically exactly what you just highlighted there. If you max out your TFSA and your RSP using super easy index solutions like we just talked about, whether it's robos or TD or do-it-yourself ETFs, I think then dividend stocks do make a lot of sense. So if you're going to we'll get super niche here and say, like, if you're going to do like the Smith maneuver or something like that, or invest in a taxable account, a non-registered account, then I think dividends make a lot of sense. And for someone like yourself who's producing dividend income to live off of or to sort of sustain their financial independence, I think then drilling down into dividend investing makes a lot of sense. I still think, honestly, you could go with a basic index approach and just pay an accountant to figure it out, and still be, again, you're accomplishing 80% of what you want, but because that's what it boils down to with in non-registered accounts is sort of your tax preparation with index funds becomes a bit of a pain in the butt. Right. Is that sort of where, like, do you agree that that's sort of one of the main considerations at that point?
Yeah. I'm relatively new to non-registered account investing right now. Relatively recently, we maxed out our TFSAs and RSPs, so it's kind of now where I'm starting to do all the kind of research and everything and how to do it effectively. So, but yeah, the tax kind of, all the tracking and the adjusted cost base, all that stuff is kind of on my radar now because it has to be, because I still want to keep investing, right? Even though the registered accounts are full. So yeah, I don't have too much to say on it yet because it's still in the process of kind of researching it. But I have heard that it is kind of a pain to to deal with a little bit as well. Yeah, like from the tracking, from the taxation perspective.
Yeah, that's what it really boils down to. I think at the end of the day, dividend investing is still a long-term buy and hold. I think it's got a lot in common. At the end of the day, I still am not sold on the idea of whether you're talking about dividend or growth investing or whatever, that picking stocks, you're going to outdo the market average. Mm-hmm. And so really that's what it honestly just boils down to for me. But as I've sort of, talked to more and more just people about personal finance, I try not to get boiled down in like the dividend versus index debate, the TFSA versus RSP debate. I try not to get too boiled down at first because I feel like oftentimes people miss that forest for the tree that's right in front of them. And if you get the big things right before you drill down into the nuance, then you're going to be well off. If you get lost in the nuance and never actually take the big picture into consideration, you're going to lose out on a lot of investment returns and a lot of sort of lifestyle perks you could have had.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And then kind of second last question I want to ask you as well is just about bonds in general. So right now, there's definitely, I get the impression that there are quite a few Canadians that are getting older. They theoretically should have a lot more, a much more significant portion of their portfolio in bonds, but they're basically reluctant to buy them because, one, they have the lower returns, and also now there's a lot of anticipation of interest rate increases, right? Like the Bank of Canada finally increased the rates. There's people are anticipating it's going to keep going up, which is it going to make the bond prices fall, right? So people are very, very nervous about it, even though kind of a lot of the theory is saying yes, you should be buying bonds as well, especially kind of if you're approaching retirement, that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on all of that right now?
Yeah, like this is getting to, now you're dealing with some pretty nuanced stuff and a little bit of speculation here, which becomes a little bit more opinion oriented. Like, I just have no idea, honestly, what the Bank of Canada is going to do. I seriously wonder, you look at historical averages, it doesn't seem to make sense. But then again, you look at our demographics and you look at how in debt people are, and I'm not sure that we can raise rates all that much. I think there's an argument on both sides. So I don't really care to speculate as to where bonds are going to go up. I think there is some really interesting data out there. Ed Rempel actually has presented this in a pretty interesting way, and he's shown that, with people living longer on average, and sort of the different things we can expect in retirement versus when a lot of this traditional wisdom was created, basically that you might be better off staying with a much higher equities. Like the old rule of thumb was your age minus 20 in bonds sort of thing. You might find yourself running out of money sooner rather than later if you're that conservative in your portfolio. On the other hand, it's like the stereotypical financial advisor thing, right? Where you just say it depends. If you've accumulated enough assets where you can live exactly the lifestyle you want, and investing in bonds and GICs or what have you gives you enough income, then what the heck? Why take the risk?
Right.
There's no reason to be in equities just for the sake of it. So I guess it's pretty nuanced. Personally, for me, I don't have any bonds in my portfolio as a young guy. Really, the only thing I'm investing for right now is my goal is just retirement. I don't have sort of a midterm goal like buying a house or anything like that. My wife and I don't have any children. There's no plans to have children as of today. Obviously, if that changes, then an RESP would come into play or something like that in terms of investment goals. But right now, really, my only investment goal is 20 to 30 years away in terms of an investment horizon. And so therefore, I don't have any bonds in my portfolio. I think there's an argument to have 10% in bonds. I know there's folks that are going to get academic on me here and talk about horizon, optimal horizons and optimal outcomes, but I just keep it simple and stick in all equities for right now.
Gotcha. If you were, let's say, going to retire in 5 years and you didn't have, because you're a teacher, right? But let's assume you weren't and you didn't have that pension as well, would you actually be putting money in the bonds, or would you be do you think it'd still be kind of all equities or something in the middle?
I probably would. I probably would have like maybe a 30-40%. I'd have to look at it, and again, it obviously depends on your individual circumstances. But I probably would have some, maybe some long-term bonds. I might look at some different bond ETF options, and perhaps maybe a high-interest savings account. I think some of the online high-interest savings accounts that are out there, their rates are actually pretty competitive with a lot of the short-term bonds right now. So I would definitely look at taking away some of the risk in my portfolio, just so if 2008 hits, I'm not forced to liquidate a substantial part of my portfolio at an inoptimal time.
Right. Yeah, especially if you're doing like a full retirement where you're not working at all anymore and you actually do need the income from your investments, or else you need it to eat, basically. So
exactly,
the options are a lot different. Yeah. No, that sounds good, Kyle. So let's talk a bit about the Canadian Financial Summit that you're organizing. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so basically, what we're going to do at the Canadian Financial Summit is bring together sort of 25 experts in Canadian personal finance, and including, Canada's best-looking, most charismatic podcaster, Cornell Schreiber. and yeah, I tell Preet Banerjee that when he comes on too. And so we're going to get these 25 folks together, and we're going to get them all in one place, and you can stream their sessions live. I'm going to ask them sort of what do you want to talk about? What are you passionate about right now, or sort of what do you have maybe that's a little bit unique in your story? And we're going to put them online, and you just head on over to CanadianFinancialSummit.com and you sign up, and then you're going to get an email on September 13th or September 14th, and it's going to say, hey, come check out these great speakers, and you're just going to head on over and hit play, and you're going to get the benefit of sort of seeing some of these great speakers that I can pretty much guarantee you'd never get their schedules to line up to get them at the same conference. And even if you could, you would never get those guys' schedules to line up with your schedule. I can't just go jet setting off to Toronto at the drop of a hat. I don't think most Canadians can, or perhaps they'd prefer not to. So my pitch is that you don't even have to get out of your PJs or your most comfy t-shirt. You don't have to worry about makeup or fancy shoes or impressing anyone. You just head to CanadianFinancialSummit.com, and you can see sort of experts from around Canada like Preet, like Cornell, like Rob Carrick, John Chevreau, Ellen Roseman. We got a lot of folks that you'll probably recognize there.
Yeah, it's a fully stacked group though. I'm pretty excited. I'm gonna be listening to, I think, all the sessions, because I'm just really excited. So thanks for organizing that, Kyle. That's awesome. And then apart from that, where else can everyone find you as well?
Well, you'll see me writing from time to time in a few places, but youngandthrifty.ca is where it's easiest to find it myself. So yeah, youngandthrifty.ca and the Canadian Financial Summit. Make sure if you're a fan of Build Wealth Canada, I think you're going to really enjoy the Financial Summit. And big shout out to Canadian Money Saver and 5i Research for helping us put that together.
Awesome. All right, Kyle, thanks so much for coming on, and look forward to the summit.
All right, thanks for having me, Cornell.
All right, take care. Bye. All right, I hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to get your free tickets to the Canadian Financial Summit by going to buildwealthcanada.ca/summit. That's SUMMIT. And if you're listening to this episode in the future or can't make the conference today, then you can still go to buildwealthcanada.ca/summit to get your all access pass, which will give you unlimited access to all the talks so that you can watch them at your own leisure whenever you do have the time. All right, so I hope to see you at the conference and talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.